Member for Scarborough Southwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, this week's unfortunate events involving the Minister of Veterans Affairs and tomorrow's closing of veteran centres exposes the soft underbelly of this government beast, a government ruled by uncaring ideology instead of good public policy. It is indeed an honour and a privilege to rise today to add my voice in defending and honouring our veterans. The reduction in services for our brave men and women who risk their lives for us, for our country, and for our freedom is appalling and without merit. The cowardice on display across the aisle dishonours the great sacrifice made by generations of men and women who have served Canada in its time of need. Where are the Conservative backbenchers who should be pushing their government to reverse these reckless cuts? They should be joining us in calling for improvements instead of meekly lining up behind the minister, marching veterans into Service Canada to stand in line. Mr. Speaker, they've already stood on the line. In Passchendaele, at Vimy Ridge, at the Somme, where my great-grandfather, Lieutenant Louis Rosario Lavoie, made the ultimate sacrifice, in the Spanish Civil War, in Dieppe on D-Day, Monte Cassino, Hong Kong, Korea, Bosnia, Afghanistan, and countless other locations at home and around the world. They've done their time on the line. Now, this government is asking them to make another sacrifice. And I say, no. Mr. Speaker, what all Canadians want, what veterans want and deserve, and what we on this side of the House want is for this government to give those who have faithfully served Canada and their families the respect and dignity that they deserve. As we approach the 100th anniversary of the start of the Great War, I'm reminded of my great-grandfather, Harold Riley, who served Canada in both World Wars. He was wounded 3 times in the Great War, came back with shell shock, and suffered regular nightmares for the rest of his life. We didn't know what we now do, how to help soldiers who come back home with mental health issues. We owe it to them to provide all the help that we can so they don't suffer like my great-grandfather and so many others did, so that they can lead happy, peaceful lives after that great personal sacrifice. It is time we act on the over 50 outstanding boards of inquiry on military suicides so that grieving families may have the answers and closure that they deserve, and so that we may learn how to better prevent more tragedies in the future. Recent soldiers should be of great concern to Canadians, as they are to New Democrats, and our motion today seeks to address this very important issue. Last October 1st, on the 3rd anniversary of the passing of my grandmother, Ivy Harris, who worked at the G-Code munitions plant as a teenager with my great-grandmother, and then at 17, joined the Canadian Women's Army Corps. My father, my uncle, and I became members of the Royal Canadian Legion, Branch 73, in her honor and in honor of all of our family who have answered our country's call. I feel it is my duty to them to rise and defend all of our veterans. It's about respect and dignity, Mr. Speaker. In addition, this is also why I will be soon tabling a private member's bill in this House to make Remembrance Day a national statutory holiday. On the 100th year from the start of the war to end all wars, my private member's bill is one way that I can personally convey my profound respect to all those who have served our country and continue to faithfully serve our country this day. It is time we recommit ourselves wholeheartedly to our veterans, and I know Canadians agree, and I hope soon that Conservatives will agree too. Now, Mr. Speaker, of course, today we are also talking about the closing of 8 veteran centres across the country, where veterans are going to be asked to go and stand in Service Canada lines, or to suffer through horrific wait times on the phone, as we've been hearing for the last year and a half since Conservatives started cutting Service Canada locations, where we have dropped calls, where we have a degradation in quality in service, where even MPs representing their constituents can sometimes have troubles getting through. And this is what we want to make our veterans do, Mr. Speaker. It's a disgrace to ask our veterans to be going and standing in line after all that they have done for our country. The closing of the Veterans Centre, Mr. Speaker, is inevitably going to degrade the service that they receive. My grandmother, after she became a senior citizen and was starting to have troubles keeping up the house, the Veterans Affairs Center was there for her. They helped to provide the services that helped her to stay in her home so that she could live her life out in dignity and in peace without having to suffer through giving up the home that she had lived in for over 50 years. Now, Mr. Speaker, I can't fathom why the government's gone to make these changes and then they practically spit in the face of veterans when the minister makes such appalling remarks and then exhibits behavior and of a crass nature. Yeah, sure, he apologized, but it shouldn't have happened in the first place. That kind of thing should never happen, Mr. Speaker. And to make veterans then wait 70 minutes, that's the kind of level of service they're going to get going to Service Canada offices. And that's exactly the service that the minister gave. And we think that he should resign, and if he doesn't resign, that it's the Prime Minister's responsibility to show the respect to our brave men and women by firing him. He's shown time and time again on the F-35 file, on military procurement, and now in Veterans Affairs, that he has absolutely no business being a Minister of the Crown. Unfortunately, of course, coming from Toronto, I've had lots of previous experience with this minister as the head of the OPP, as the Toronto Police Chief, and then from afar when he was the Chief of Police in London. And you would think after all of those years of service, after all of that experience gained, that he would have a little bit more compassion and respect for the men and women who wear uniforms for our country. And of course, the Veterans Affairs Centers, they also serve RCMP veterans. Men and women who have defended our streets and who have kept our streets safe all over the country, Mr. Speaker, and sometimes in very, very remote locations. All of these men and women who have served Canada deserve to have the best kind of service that we can offer, to have the best mental health services that we can offer. And sadly, Mr. Speaker, this government has been sorely lacking in this regard. And again, I mean, why? Is this all about the budget line? Is this all about balancing the books so that we can give a whole bunch of tax credits that won't actually help working people and won't help most of the veterans who have served our country? Is that what this is about, the bottom line? Because I think this is one area where the bottom line, while always important, shouldn't be the determining and deciding factor. What should be the determining and deciding factor of what kind of services we provide, of what veteran centers we have, of what we do to honor their sacrifice, should be about giving and providing the best possible service. That should be the determining factor. But again, so we're closing veteran centers all across the country, and we're going to put them in the Service Canada locations. 600 points of service, 600 points of bad service doesn't mean an improvement in services for veterans. Replacing 13 people that deal with their cases in some offices with one person in the Service Canada office to deal with their cases is not improving services, Mr. Speaker. That's 1/13th, and that's if they can even get that person. If there's somebody else in line in front of them, or if they're serving somebody else, they might be sent off to a telephone, asked to go look at a computer to file their claims. Well, Mr. Speaker, I mean, online services is a whole other issue, and this government's been lacking there too. Sure, over 90% of EI claimants can file their claims online, but they can't even check the status of their claims online. And now we want to tell veterans to go and get their services online and to download an app on their phone? The world is changing, and the face of veterans is changing. They're becoming younger and younger. And those kinds of online services might be good for them, but it's not good for those that came before them. We're asking people in their 80s and 90s to go and sit in a Service Canada office using one of their computers. It's an absolute disgrace, Mr. Speaker. It's a degradation of service, and it has no business in this House. We should be doing absolutely everything we can to improve services for veterans to honor that great sacrifice. And I've repeated that a couple of times, because they have sacrificed everything for our country, and we're not even going to do the same for them. We should. We have to. We must. Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Burlington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for the opposite for his speech, which I did disagree with much of it. But the one thing, I've been sitting here all day, Mr. Speaker, listening to the speeches, and I'm a little concerned that some of the speeches from the opposition benches are saying that this 650 new sites, or 600 sites, will round down if you want, that they're going to get bad service, that our veterans are getting bad service, that people of Canada are getting bad service. Why is the opposition consistently attacking our civil servants who work at our Service Canada sites across this country? They give excellent service, and they should be, on this side, we're proud of the work that they're doing. Why aren't they?
The Honourable Member for Scarborough Southwest.
Well, he must be in the pockets of the big union bosses, Mr. Speaker, after that kind of speech. But wow, do you honestly not hear from your constituents about the kind of bad service that they get? Mr. Speaker, the workers that work in Service Canada locations do an excellent job. They do an excellent job without the kind of resources that they need to provide the level of service to Canadians that they deserve. Mr. Speaker, there's a big difference between the workers doing a great job and the managers hashing it up.
Order. Order. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I've had the opportunity to serve in the Canadian Forces, and it was quite the privilege and honour to do so. Having said that, when I left the services, one of the things that I noticed is that the private sector, government sectors, non-profit groups tend to look at individuals retiring from the forces with a great deal of respect. You know, when you apply for a position, you're often even given maybe that extra little consideration. In fact, we have groups such as the Manitoba Commissioners, or the Commissioners in Canada, who will hire retiring military personnel. And it's because there's this sense of respect for what members of the forces do. Now what we've had is from the Minister responsible for Veterans Affairs, where the Minister has been called into question whether or not he respects our vets. And yesterday, the Leader of the Liberal Party, in question period, put this particular question to the Prime Minister. Those who have served their country and put themselves in harm's way for all of us deserve our respect, and they deserve our courtesy. The Canadian heroes who tried to meet with their minister yesterday received neither. Will the Prime Minister fire his Minister of Veterans Affairs? And the question to the member is, does he believe that the Minister of Veterans Affairs has demonstrated respect for our vets?
The Honourable Member for Scarborough Southwest.
Absolutely not, Mr. Speaker, and I think he's shown some very poor judgment. And I think the Prime Minister showed some pretty poor judgment in the House yesterday when he basically called the veterans who came in to demand the services that they deserve part of the union, that it was a union plot, Mr. Speaker. Well, you know what? Guess what? Unions who are there for working people, and soldiers and veterans in the military are working people, and guess what? They work together on getting the services that they need and deserve. The unions respect the soldiers. Why don't the Conservatives?